It's one of those real head-scratchers in the story of Jesus. How could the people closest to him, the ones who literally walked with him every single day, just completely miss the point in a moment that mattered so much? It's a fascinating story about being right there, but not really seeing a thing.
So let's really dive into that question, because it's at the absolute heart of this story. We're going to be looking at a passage from Matthew 26. And trust me, this isn't just some ancient account. Nope. It's a deeply human story about how we see things, how we judge, and how sometimes we can be blind even when we're standing next to the people we care about most.
All right, so let's set the scene here because the tension is just palpable. Jesus is in this incredibly tough spot, kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. He's surrounded by two very different groups who are, in their own ways, a threat to him.
So on one side, you've got the religious leaders, the chief priests, the elders, and they are actively, secretly plotting to kill him. I mean, that's the obvious danger, right? But then on the other side, you have his inner circle, his best friends, the disciples. And they are just moments away from totally misreading a beautiful act of worship, and in doing so, they're going to reveal a pretty shocking spiritual blindness.
And this all comes to a head with this one single event, which becomes the catalyst for this whole confrontation. It all goes down in a town called Bethany, at the house of a guy named Simon the leper. And it's here that one person's action sparks this massive clash of perspectives. Just try to picture this scene. A woman comes up to Jesus. She's holding an alabaster jar, which, by the way, was a sign of huge value all on its own. And it's filled with this incredibly expensive perfume. And without saying a word, she breaks it and pours the entire thing over his head. It's a shocking, over-the-top, beautiful gesture.
And wow, the reactions could not be more night and day. It is such a stark contrast. The disciples see this and they are immediately indignant. Their reaction is totally practical. Almost like accountants. Why this waste? We could have sold this for a ton of money and given it to the poor. But Jesus, he sees something completely different. He doesn't just see perfume, he sees a beautiful thing. And he gives it this deep symbolic meaning. She's anointing him for his own burial. They saw waste, he saw worship.
And this just hammers home how big the disconnect is. Jesus doesn't just defend her, he promotes her action to a place of eternal importance. He says that this moment, this thing his own friends just condemned, is going to be remembered forever. So what on earth did they miss that was so important?
So let's unpack this, because the disciples' failure here wasn't just, a bad mood. They missed layers and layers of deep meaning that were happening right in front of their faces. They missed some huge clues.
Okay, it really all boils down to one word: Messiah. The most basic title they had for Jesus, Messiah, literally means anointed one. So when this woman poured that oil, she wasn't just making him smell nice. She was making a powerful statement, without saying a word, about who Jesus is. And that act of anointing was packed with meaning.
See, in the history that these guys knew inside and out, anointing was a huge deal. It was saved for the most sacred things. You anointed kings, like David and Solomon, to set them apart to rule. You anointed priests, like Aaron, to consecrate them for their holy service. You even anointed the objects in the temple to make them holy. These were all symbols the disciples should have recognized in a heartbeat. So you see, this wasn't just some random gesture. It was a living, breathing sermon. This woman was basically proclaiming, this is the Messiah King. This is the eternal high priest. And while his friends were busy doing the math on the cost of the oil, she was proclaiming his divine identity.
And then, right on the heels of this incredible moment of worship, the story just takes this incredibly dark turn. One of the 12, Judas, gets up, walks away, and goes to negotiate a price for betraying Jesus. And that price? 30 pieces of silver. And believe me, that number is anything but random. This number is just dripping with insulting historical meaning. In the Old Testament law in Exodus, 30 shekels of silver was the price you paid to a master if their slave was killed by an animal. It was the value of damaged property. Then in the book of Zechariah, it's the insulting, pathetic wage that's offered to God's prophet, a payment so disrespectful that God tells him to throw it away. This is the value that was put on Jesus' life.
So what's the point of all this? Well, the disciples' reaction, their indignation, it wasn't just a simple mistake. In that moment of judgment, they started to sound exactly like the very people Jesus had warned them about time and time again, the Pharisees.
And you know what's crazy? This wasn't the first time they'd seen this kind of knee-jerk judgment. They had been on the receiving end of it before.
You might remember that story from Matthew 12, where they were hungry and picked some grain to eat on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees immediately jumped down their throats for breaking the rules. And this is what Jesus told the Pharisees back then. He quoted the ancient scriptures to them, saying, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice," to teach them a lesson about condemning people who are actually guiltless. And now, how tragic is this? His own guys are making the exact same mistake. They chose rigid judgment over mercy, and because of it, they condemned a beautiful, guiltless act.
And that brings us to the real heart of the lesson here, doesn't it? It's a powerful idea that is just as relevant for us today as it was for those disciples sitting in that room.
Here it is, the big takeaway. When we let go of mercy, we rush to condemn things we don't understand. And when we do that, we risk becoming totally blind to what God might be doing right in front of our noses. Look, the disciples' logic about helping the poor wasn't wrong on its own. The problem wasn't their brains, it was their spiritual vision. Their first clue should have been Jesus' reaction. The moment he welcomed her act, they should have hit pause on their own judgment, trusted him, and tried to see her with mercy, even if they didn't get it. Their blindness was a choice.
And that's the question I really want to leave you with. In our own lives, what beautiful, surprising, maybe even messy act of God might we be writing off as waste just because it doesn't fit into our tidy little boxes? It's a real challenge to try and see with eyes of mercy so that we, unlike the disciples in the story, don't miss everything.